Welcome, I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, In the Beginning, the Book of Genesis. Today we'll be talking about Lesson 14 of our study, which covers the Book of Genesis, chapter 24. In this lesson we get into a much happier, for Isaac, series of events than the ones from our previous lesson. Quite a bit happens text-wise. It's not a short chapter. From a narrative point of view, it is fairly straightforward. The biggest points are right at the beginning and kind of follow up on some of the suggestions from the last lesson. Namely, Abraham is not talking to Isaac about this directly. He's talking to his servant. This is what God wants. Why do you think Abraham might not be willing to be having an intimate conversation with Isaac about how important it is for Isaac to do what God wants if Abraham dies before it's done? There might be a reason that Isaac wouldn't be terribly receptive to that. If you're confused about that, what that is, go back 2 chapters. It's pretty straightforward. 2, because of that strained relationship with Isaac, Abraham views it as critically important that Isaac's wife is from their kin, specifically people who have a relationship with God. Because Isaac's isn't solid. This emphasis and view of how and why this happens, like Isaac gets lumped in with the patriarchs, right? He's the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. This kind of issue in the middle of that gets looked over so much and not really dwelt on, but it matters so much for the story of the patriarchs, right? You have the lifelong faith of Abraham and the eventual faith of Jacob, and the story in between is interesting, and it is our current point shifting away from Abraham of drama and tension in this book is you have this lineage that's meant to be anchored in and blessed by and fulfilling these promises about God. And you have a patriarch that can't be trusted to do something as simple as finding the right wife for himself without meddling from his dad. How is this going to work? And what's going to happen? Isaac's story is so short in the Bible because he fails to rise to the level of his father and his less preferred son. It's an interesting thing. It's also so often how families work. So we will see how that plays out, but it's never explicit in the text, is why I want to talk about it a little bit, right? It's so easy to go along and Isaac just had a good relationship with God because Abraham did, and Jacob, of course, did his whole life, and there were never problems there. And people get that point of view about these guys. Abraham is the only one who had a solid, lifelong relationship with God. Isaac might have had a childhood that was okay with God, and then from then on out it seems like he mostly didn't. Jacob's childhood was not okay with God, and then eventually we'll see it becomes okay, and things continue. And then we know there's all that about Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat and his time in Egypt. But Joseph's relationship with God also lifelong solid, right? Jacob getting back on track allows for Joseph to be on track, but his brothers maybe not quite as much. What with the whole, we'll get there. But there's a lot of interesting commentary here on family dynamics and how relationships with God work, right? These are the chosen people by God, and like more than half of them, if you count all of Jacob's sons, still don't have a solid relationship with God. Even like 11/12 of Jacob's sons, even when he gets it, don't have that same relationship with God, even when Jacob does. And doesn't have, there are mitigating factors, right, in how parents treat children, right? The whole Abraham sacrificing Isaac almost incident, and Jacob playing favorites. And there are the actions of the parents have bearing on the faith of the children, entirely aside from whether or not they're telling their children about God. That's not the part of it that determines whether the children are interested in pursuing a relationship with God. It's all about the parent's relationship with the child and not anyone's relationship with God that conveys that. That's still true. That is an accurate thing to human nature, right? And you see, unfortunately, people trying to get their children to be religious by forcing religion on them. That's not how that is conveyed, right? You get your child to be interested in and adopt your faith by having a strong relationship with your child and by having your faith, not by trying to shove your faith on your child. I've seen so many cases where people get that wrong, and then they're concerned, very rightly concerned, by, I'm worried for, like Abraham is here, right? I'm worried for my child and his future, and there's nothing I can do about it now because that relationship is broken to a point that what can I do? I don't have the leverage. I have tried to give my son to God and God to my son, and it didn't go well. And I have not been well received in that effort, and now there's nothing I can do. And there is nothing he can do directly. It's a poignant thing, right? And it's notable as we go through it that God eventually intervenes and rights the lineage and gets people back in line and on track, right? And we have bright shining stars come right around in the next couple of generations with God's and Rebekah's intervention. When dad's not getting it done, mom also goes quite a ways to get in there, which is why Rebekah is so important, right? Rebekah becomes, you talk about the patriarchs, but if you're keeping relationship with God and following that side of the lineage, the patriarchs are Abraham, Rebekah, and Jacob. But you can't, back then you couldn't name women in that kind of list, but functionally, for the continuation of what God intends, that would be a more accurate way to look at it. Again, so interesting, so much going on. This is not that part. This is set up for that part. This is, we need Rebekah to enter the story, and she gets more screen time than Isaac does. Why? Because she's the more important one. This is like the call of Abraham. This is the call of Rebekah into that line, which matters because she matters greatly. With Sarah dead, Abraham is contemplating his own mortality here. He's afraid that he will not be around to see his son married. And so he is charging his oldest, most responsible, and most trusted servant with what he wants to see happen there. There are two parts to that. First, Isaac cannot marry a Canaanite. Why is that? Is that I used to read this and think, oh, it's because we have to keep the lineage pure, and we care about this family and this group of people. Now I don't think that. I don't think at this point we care about that. What we care about right now is Isaac's faith is not strong. And if we married him to somebody whose faith is not strong, it's game over. So I don't think this is about the generality of race and lineage and all of that. I think this is about the particular situation of Isaac, which makes it make a lot more sense to me, honestly. So that's one. And the second point is, for a similar reason, Isaac can't go back to where we came from. Why? Because Abraham could be told to go to the land of Canaan and would go. If Isaac leaves the promised land and goes back to where he came from and finds a family and a wife and everybody there, he's staying there, right? Like, he's not going back into the promised land. And God appearing like he did to Abraham and saying, Isaac, go. The story wouldn't be God said to Isaac, go, and Isaac went. The story would be God said to Isaac, go, and Isaac stayed. These things that Abraham has in mind aren't broad precepts about how his people should behave. It is his concern for his son and his desire to see his son stay in line with God's will. And him being afraid that he is going to die and not have the ability to see that through. Abraham tells his servant, because Abraham does still have a good relationship with God, that don't worry about it. God's angel will go with you. It'll work out. And if for some reason, because the servant's complaint is, I'm going to go there, I'm going to find some woman, and she's just going to come back with me on my word that is to get married, that's a good idea. Everything's sight unseen. Abraham, I am skeptical. And Abraham says, nope, God's got it covered. The angel will go with you. He'll take care of it. It'll be fine. And if it's not, you are released from your word. It's on God to make, you have to try. It's on God to make it work, and he will. And then the servant swears to it. We're not going to worry too much about how that oath is handled and hands under thighs and all of that. Key points there. 1, that is not a sex thing. 2, it just seems to be some way of binding intimately and closely binding an agreement that they were doing back then. That is old thing that we don't do anymore. It seems really weird to us now. The important point is, this is like a strongly emphasized way of committing. I am going to do this. Yes, I will. I swear to it. Like, they couldn't put their hand on a Bible because there was no Bible, right? Not that that's maybe terribly appropriate to do, to neither here nor there. We probably shouldn't do that either, but we do. And as an example, they couldn't do that, right? So this is like, I solemnly swear sort of thing. And that's all this should be taken as. A few interesting things going on here. So the servant pulls into town with his camels, and he's loaded up a bunch of various loot. This is important, by the way, right? Because sight unseen, like asking somebody to go, like you want to at least kind of demonstrate, like this isn't just about like buying her. This is like showing her that like you're not moving out into like, they're not poor, right? You're not moving out into like the slums, and like this is going to be okay, right? Like this is actually a very meaningful gesture and not just buying a woman. Although that sort of kind of happened back then-ish and does again. But it's about more than that, right? So the servant's plan, though, is not just to like go around and see who has a woman for sale, right? Because that's not what they're doing. What he wants to do is he wants to find the right person. And to do that, he has a conversation with God, with the God of Abraham, not here listed as the God of Abraham and Isaac, the God of Abraham. Because that connection with God is going from Abraham to Abraham's servant to Rebekah to Jacob, and skipping around Isaac, fascinatingly, as we've said. But the servant has, in his time with Abraham, he knows this is a thing that has to do with what Abraham wants, right? And Abraham has said, God will be with you. So he's thinking, okay, God will be with me. But he's also, being a very capable servant, he has his own plan, right? He's not saying, God, tell me how I should figure out who this is. He's saying, God, this is what I have in mind. Allow this to work. And what he has in mind is, it's not flash your wealth a little bit and then have all the women in town come out, dress up nice, come out and see who looks the best. It's, let's see who does something hospitable and kind. And that's the one I want. God, are you okay with that idea? Please help that be what we do. He's really taking the spirit of, he's trying to do really right by Abraham, right? He could fulfill the letter of his promise by finding any woman here willing and carting her back, and it would be okay. But he knows he knows he needs to do well here, right? So he has a plan, and he is actively trying to find the best one. And best here he is measuring by hospitality and kindness. And he asks God to make that effort fruitful. In this case, we see God is motivated and working quickly. The servant is not yet done uttering his prayer when the first woman walks up, who happens to be young, unmarried, and gorgeous. And he says to her, as he planned, could you give me a little water? And she says yes, and does. And then she volunteers, all of those camels you have look thirsty. I will find water for them too. And then he pulls out some gold bracelets and says, can I stay with you? Again, that is testing hospitality, right? Who are you? Who are you related to? And could I stay there? This is going very well for him, right? This is not the first time that the well was apparently where you go to find young women in this time. This is not the only time this happens. It works the very best in this time. He doesn't have to stay at the well very long at all. We're seeing how enthusiastic God is about doing this by the fact, like, he doesn't have to go back night and day and try a bunch of different times. This is just, he gets there, Rebekah is there, this works. Yes, sure, you can come back and stay with us. And yes, I'm directly related to Abraham, and kind of Isaac's cousin. But back then, that was a thing that was okay. And that's, in fact, exactly what we're looking for. Rebekah goes ahead to warn the family that she's bringing company. And of the family that she warns is her brother Laban, who sees that she has been gifted some valuable things and decides himself it would be a very good idea to be hospitable. And so definitely encourages that, gets everything ready, and prepares a meal. And the servant, before eating, says, I've got to let you all know what I'm doing here. Let's have a conversation first. Laban and his appreciation of money is a thing to keep in mind for quite a lot later. This part is largely a summary of, or the retelling of the things that we already know, right? So as the conversation with Laban progresses, he says, here I was figuring out who I could marry to Isaac and have who was going to inherit my master's great wealth. And I ran into your sister first at the well, and she fit everything that I was looking for. And so now what I would like to do is take her back to Canaan, to my master's son Isaac, who's close family, and about to be filthy rich. And I would like to further join in union our families. Is that okay with all of you? And Laban and Bethuel answer, far be it from us to stand in the way of God's will. And the cash. We are on board with this, yes. Jokes aside, there is no evidence that, they say that the Lord matters, but the money is, the text hints at, Laban got receptive when he saw the gold, right? It's there in the text that maybe they're not doing this because of God, and that it at least helps a great deal that Abraham is loaded. But you work with what you have, and they have agreed to let Rebekah go and be Isaac's wife. And of course, no one asked Rebekah how she felt about that. That doesn't seem to have been relevant to this conversation. But just like that, Rebekah is to be married off. So, servant brings out some stuff to give to Rebekah, more stuff. They do eat the meal, and then in the morning he says, okay, so I'm ready to go, and we're done here, right? So I can just leave now with Rebekah, right? And they say, well, maybe she could stay for a little while longer, 10 days. How about 10 days? And then they say, finally, the next day, Rebekah, will you go with this man? And she says, guys, I see how it is. Yeah, let's just leave. I think I'm done here. And she's in no hurry. She sees no reason to linger at home at any rate. And it seems to be the case that she's more than happy to go see what's in store in her new life. So off they go. So Jacob's, or sorry, so Abraham's servant and some other servants who made the trip, and Rebekah and her nurse get ready to leave. Uh, Small retinue, mostly servants, and Rebekah. Uh, and on the way out, um, Rebekah's relatives, probably Laban, um, say to her, yeah, definitely Laban, our sister be the mother of thousands of 10,000s. May her descendants possess the gates of those who hate them. Great parting. Good job, guys. Not, I love you, sister. Be happy and well in your new life. But that is also like what happens with descendants is a big deal then, and this is a reflection of part of the promise that was made to Abraham. Here then, as our retinue is arriving at where Isaac lives now, interestingly, we don't see this as where Isaac and Abraham are living, and we're only meeting Isaac and not Abraham. Whether Abraham is, yeah. Anyway, that's, they seem to not be living in the same place, which is consistent with previous speculation. And we'll leave it at that. As they're approaching, Isaac is out in the field meditating, not praying, but out in the field nonetheless. That was where people have gone to commune. Things like that were how people communed with God, and they walked and talked with God. That could be what he's doing. I've been a little hard on Isaac, but it could be he's on a nature walk as well, right? The text leaves it kind of vague. And meditate is an interesting word to use that seems not at all involved with God, and that seems deliberate. Anyway, as they're pulling up, Rebekah sees him, says, "Who is that?" The servant says, "Oh, that's the guy who's going to be your husband." And then she veils. Presumably, that is just a thing that would be done that is in recognition of what that is, but it seems like also like a fairly serious and classy thing to do. Like surely, like if she wanted him to catch a glimpse, she could definitely pretend like she didn't know who it was and roll up from the travel and then like get introduced and then be like, "Oh, my." But she doesn't do that, right? She's being very proper, which is more good sign of Rebekah. And we get, again, of this meeting, we get more of Rebekah's point of view than Isaac's. Who's the main character here? Isaac gets named, but Rebekah is the main character. And they lived happily ever after. And that is basic. We'll see more of that, but that is basically it, right? Like Isaac marries Rebekah and he loves her, which is important, right? God previously didn't do so well by Isaac. Here he does, right? Like this is arranged by Abraham, who loves his son, and God intervenes as well. And they find through this odd matchmaking process, they find Isaac someone that he loves, and they get him a good one. Like God is not leaving Isaac hanging or in desolation just because of that thing that had to happen, or strained relationship, right? God and Abraham never stop loving and looking after Isaac, and Isaac continues to be blessed, even if he might have hard feelings, understandably. So, insofar as is possible, and we'll see more of what comes, this provides consolation to Isaac after his mother's death, which makes sense. We never, really hear what Sarah thought of the whole field trip before, and that was probably not great. Isaac was probably very close to his mother, I would imagine, and he lives happily ever after with his wife, and we'll see what happens with his children. This has been an overview of Lesson 14 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, In the Beginning, the Book of Genesis. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.